The prophecy in our first reading that Isaiah gives to King Ahaz is well known and often quoted this time of year. But the actual interaction between prophet and king tells a more complex story. At the time, the Jewish people were split into the northern and southern kingdoms. The north was the kingdom of Israel, and the south was the kingdom of Judah. And Ahaz, at the time, was the king of Judah. And we have to know a little bit about the politics of this time to understand the prophecy. At that point, there were several small kingdoms in the area, including Israel and Judah. And there was one big kingdom, Assyria. Some of those small nations, including Israel, that northern kingdom, decided to join forces opposed to Assyria. This coalition of small nations attacked Judah to force Ahaz to join them against Assyria. Judah was able to hold them off, but those nations were going to keep coming because they had just enlisted more help. And this is when Ahaz realized he was in big trouble. When Ahaz was contemplating asking Assyria themselves for help against this coalition of small nations, Isaiah the prophet comes to him and tells him not to worry, that he shouldn't put his faith in the Assyrians. They're also bad news. Instead, he should trust in God. Isaiah even says, "Go ahead, ask God for a sign that he will protect us." And this was unusual because normally God told his people not to demand signs of him, but now he's offering one freely. And Ahaz gives a phony, pious answer as he says, "I will not ask. I will not tempt the Lord." And Isaiah's response basically says, "Ahaz, it's bad enough that you're really annoying to all the people around you. Do you really have to be annoying to God too?" And then Isaiah adds, "But Ahaz, that's too bad because God is going to give you a sign anyways." And this is the lead-in to that famous prophecy that the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. But what happens afterwards? Well, Ahaz refuses to listen, and he calls for Assyria's aid. Assyria invades that small coalition of nations and utterly destroys them, including Judah's brothers in Israel. And Assyria then made Judah completely subservient to their empire, demanding tributes, and in a sense ruling Judah without actually conquering them. Ahaz's relationship to the Assyrians became like King Herod's relationship to Rome, nothing more than a puppet king. Our gospel jumps forward to a direct descendant of King Ahaz, a man named Joseph, who was betrothed to a woman named Mary. And while Joseph was indeed of royal blood, he did not have a whole kingdom to watch over. He was a simple carpenter. But just like King Ahaz, Joseph had a big problem. Joseph just found out that Mary was with child. And at that point in time, marriage was a two-step process. Joseph and Mary were indeed married, but they were in that period of preparation before they actually started their lives together, before Joseph took Mary into his home. So this news isn't just complicated, it's dangerous. Because at that time, the legal punishment for having a child before that second step of marriage was being stoned to death. And that goes for both Joseph and Mary. And that is why Mary's fiat, her "let it be done to me according to your word," was so heroic. But for Joseph, he certainly didn't want that punishment imposed on Mary, and so he decided to divorce her quietly. But when an angel comes to him in a dream, the angel says, "Do not be afraid to take Mary, your wife, into your home." And this is the crucial point, because Joseph and Ahaz were in very similar situations. Both were facing utter destruction from forces way more powerful than them, and both were offered the same sign: the virgin conceiving and bearing a son who will be called Emmanuel, God with us. And we certainly all know how Joseph responded. This sign, that of a virgin conceiving and bearing a son, is a sign not just for those two men, but a sign for all time, a sign that God will make incredible blessings spring up from the most unlikely of places. Jesus embodies that reality from the virgin birth through his life-giving death. Joseph doesn't say a single word in the whole of the Gospels. And while he does indeed say a lot through his actions, we also have the words of St. Paul today. Paul, who has recognized this reality and says that we are called to bring about the obedience of faith for the sake of his name among all the Gentiles. But I think we have to be careful, because the obedience Paul is talking about isn't sitting back and doing nothing. The angel didn't tell Joseph to simply do nothing, but to take Mary into his home, to take action. And when we are faced with dilemmas like that of Joseph and Ahaz, we are called to do the same, to move forward in faith, trusting in the providence and the care of God. The author J.R.R. Tolkien coined the term eucatastrophe. Eucatastrophe. It means that in those moments when everything seems at its darkest, at its lowest, at its most desperate, suddenly victory is achieved, success is gained, the obstacle is overcome. And so often that's how our God likes to work, through eucatastrophes. We rejoice today in the faith that when we put our trust in God, he can indeed bring about the greatest of goods in the most unexpected ways.